Emily Carter was 29 years old. She worked as a waitress at Lily's Diner, a small restaurant tucked between a hardware store and a laundromat in a rural Kansas community. Her life followed a strict routine every day. She would wake up before dawn, walk 3 blocks to work, tie her faded blue apron around her waist, and greet the regular morning customers with a smile that masked the loneliness she carried inside. She lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment above the local pharmacy. The few family photographs she owned had yellowed with time. Her father had passed away when she was 15. Her mother followed 2 years later. The aunt who raised her eventually moved to Arizona due to arthritis, leaving Emily with nothing more than occasional holiday phone calls and sporadic letters. One Tuesday morning in October, Emily noticed the boy for the first time. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, small for his age with watchful eyes that seemed to absorb everything without giving anything away. He always sat at the table furthest from the door, with a backpack far too big for him resting at his side and a book open in front of him. The first time, he asked only for a glass of water. Emily brought it to him, adding a smile and a paper straw. The boy thanked her with a nod so slight it was almost imperceptible. The second day, it was the same, and the third and the fourth as well. After 2 weeks, Emily had already recognized his pattern. He arrived at 7:15 a.m. sharp, about 45 minutes before classes began at the elementary school 3 blocks away. He would sit, read quietly, sip his water slowly, and watch the other patrons enjoy stacks of pancakes, eggs, bacon, and toast. At exactly 7:55, he would close his book, thank her, and leave, always without ordering anything. On the 15th day, Emily accidentally brought him a plate of pancakes. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, placing the plate in front of him as if confused. "The kitchen made an extra. I'll just leave it here instead of throwing it away." The boy lifted his eyes, suspicion and hunger fighting in his gaze. "It's all right," she reassured him. "Sometimes the cook messes up orders. Better to eat than to waste, right?" Without waiting for a response, Emily stepped away, discreetly watching from behind the counter as he, hesitantly, picked up the fork. When she returned about 10 minutes later, the plate was empty, and the boy remained focused on his book, carefully avoiding her gaze. "Thank you," he whispered when she cleared the plate. From that day forward, a silent ritual formed between them. Every morning, Emily would accidentally bring an extra plate, pancakes one day, scrambled eggs and toast another, oatmeal sprinkled with brown sugar on colder mornings. The boy never asked for anything, never started a conversation beyond a quiet, "Thank you," but he ate every bite, sometimes so quickly that it seemed he feared the food might disappear. "Who's that boy you keep serving?" asked Samuel, a retired mailman who always sat at the same counter seat. "I've never seen his parents around." "I don't know," Emily replied, "but he looks like he needs it." Lucille, who worked the griddle, cornered Emily in the back of the restaurant at the end of the 3rd week. "You're feeding a stray," she said, not unkindly, but with the bluntness of someone who had seen many good intentions backfire. "You give handouts. They never learn gratitude. One day he'll just vanish. They always do." Emily didn't argue. She merely shrugged and said, "That's all right. I've known what it's like to be that hungry too." It was the most personal thing she had ever shared with her coworkers in the 3 years she had worked at Lily's. The boy never offered his name, and Emily never asked. By the way he watched the exits, how he always sat with a clear view of the door and window. She understood that questions would only push him away. Instead, she made sure his water glass stayed full, that the pancakes were always hot, and that the small diner felt, for at least 40 minutes each morning, like a place where he could breathe a little easier. Sometimes when the restaurant was quiet and the boy was deeply absorbed in his book, Emily allowed herself to wonder whether he lived nearby, whether he had family, why he was always alone, and why hunger clung to him like an old companion. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. She had learned that often, kindness with conditions did more harm than kindness with silence. So she maintained their quiet arrangement, observing as, little by little, the boy's shoulders began to relax, losing some of their constant tension, and his eyes began to meet hers a fraction longer each time she approached his table. That tiny change, the subtle stretching of eye contact from a millisecond to perhaps 2, was enough for Emily to believe that even the smallest gestures were making a difference. By the 6th week, other customers had begun to notice Emily's routine with the boy. Most remained silent, but a few couldn't resist making remarks, laced with the particular cruelty of those who have long forgotten what it means to need help. "Playing sane on company time?" sneered a businessman who frequently ate at Lily's diner, his tone dripping with disdain. "Kids today think they're entitled to everything for free. Times sure have changed," muttered another regular. "In my day, no one got free food just because they looked sad." Emily heard the comments but let them slide off her like raindrops on a window pane. She had long learned that defending kindness often only hardened the hearts of those who refused to understand it. However, Thomas, the restaurant manager, was not so easy to ignore. One morning, he called her into the small office behind the kitchen, his forehead glistening with sweat, his expression serious. "I've been watching how you interact with that boy," he said, drumming his fingers on the laminate desk. "We can't have staff giving away meals. It hurts business and sets a bad precedent." Emily twisted her apron nervously in her hands. "I understand. I'll pay for it out of my own pocket." Thomas raised his eyebrows in disbelief. "With your tips? They barely cover your rent." "It's my choice," Emily said firmly, her voice steady enough to make Thomas study her more carefully. "Just one meal a day. I can manage." After a moment, Thomas sighed. "All right, but if it affects your work, or if that boy causes any trouble, it stops immediately, understand?" Emily nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She had braced herself for a reprimand, maybe even termination, but this agreement she could live with. Each morning she set aside a portion of her tips, money that could have gone toward a new winter coat or that long-postponed dental appointment, to cover the boy's breakfast. One cold Thursday morning in November, the boy didn't show up. Emily found herself glancing at the door every few minutes, a growing sense of unease settling in her stomach. Nevertheless, she prepared his usual plate of pancakes and placed it at his table, just in case. "Waste of food," Lucille muttered as she passed by, shaking her head in disapproval. By closing time, the untouched plate sat there like a silent accusation. Emily wrapped up the cold pancakes and took them home, unable to simply throw them away. The boy didn't appear the next day, nor the one after. A week passed with no sign of him, and Emily began to wonder if Lucille had been right. Maybe the boy had simply moved on, the way stray dogs do. The thought left a hollow ache inside her that she couldn't explain. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, yet somehow his absence felt like a small light had gone out. "Told you," Lucille said on the 10th day of his absence, not unkindly but with the bitterness of someone whose cynicism had once again been confirmed. "They never stay after the handouts end." During this time, Emily noticed a customer taking pictures of the empty booth where she still occasionally left a meal. The next day, she found out why. A local Facebook group had posted the photos with a mocking caption, "Lily's Diner now serving meals to ghosts." The comments that followed were even crueler. "Cheap publicity stunt. Bet they claim the food goes to needy kids while they toss it. Feeding strays only makes more beggars. That waitress needs a serious reality check. Next time some random kid approaches you, remember, you're being set up." Emily had never considered herself particularly sensitive to public opinion, but the meanness of the comments struck her deeply. That night, alone in her small apartment above the pharmacy, she questioned her actions for the first time. Had she been naive to help someone she knew nothing about? Was she simply projecting her own wounds onto a situation she didn't fully understand? Seeking comfort, Emily opened a small wooden box where she kept her most precious belongings. Inside was a yellowed photograph of her father, dressed in his Army medical uniform, smiling kindly despite the harsh desert backdrop. Next to it rested the small leather journal he had carried during his service, its pages worn from frequent handling. Emily turned to a familiar page, the corners dog-eared from being reopened so often, and reread the words she knew by heart. "I shared half my rations with a local boy today. Johnson said I was foolish, that the boy might reveal our position. Maybe. But the look in his eyes while he ate, it was the same as mine when Mom saved the last piece of bread for me during hard times. No one grows poorer by sharing half a loaf, but those who forget how to share stay hungry forever." She traced her fingers over her father's handwriting, and suddenly a flood of clarity swept over her. Emily understood. She didn't need to know the boy's name or his story to recognize hunger, whether physical or of the soul. And hunger, she knew, was answered not with questions, but with bread. Nobody knew the boy's name. Nobody would remember the face of the one they helped. But every morning, for a little while, someone had walked away from Lily's diner a little less hungry. If you still believe that small acts of kindness can change someone's life, share hope. On the morning of the boy's 23rd absence, Emily arrived at Lily's diner with her expectations lowered. The old habit of glancing at the door at 7:15 remained, but it was now tinged with quiet resignation. Still, she prepared his usual plate of pancakes and placed it carefully at his table. At 9:17 a.m., something unexpected happened. The first sign was the sudden hush that fell over the diner, normally bustling with chatter and clinking dishes. Emily, pouring coffee at a table near the window, felt the air shift, like an invisible wave about to break. Emily lifted her eyes and saw 4 black SUVs with government plates pulling into the small restaurant parking lot. The vehicles moved with almost choreographed precision, forming a semicircle in front of the entrance. Inside Lily's diner, conversations came to an abrupt halt. Forks froze midair, and outside, pedestrians slowed their steps to watch as uniformed men exited the vehicles, standing at attention beside each door. From the lead SUV stepped a man whose presence commanded respect even before his uniform was fully seen. He was tall, his face weathered by years of sun and little peace, wearing the full dress uniform of a high-ranking officer, his chest adorned with rows of medals that caught the morning light. He surveyed the diner's facade carefully before walking with firm, deliberate steps toward the entrance, flanked by 2 younger officers. The bell above the door rang loudly as they entered, the sound unusually sharp against the heavy silence that had settled. Thomas hurried out from the back office, nervously adjusting his tie. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice louder than usual. The senior officer removed his cap. "I'm looking for an employee named Emily." The restaurant grew so quiet that Emily could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Every eye turned to her as she stepped forward hesitantly, still holding the coffee pot. "That's me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the dryness in her throat. The officer's stern expression softened slightly. "Emily Carter?" She nodded, setting the coffee pot down before her trembling hands could betray her. "My name is Colonel Richard Hayes, United States Army Special Forces." He reached into the chest pocket of his uniform and pulled out a crisp, official-looking envelope. "I'm here because of a promise made to one of my men." The colonel extended the envelope toward her. "This is a letter from the General Commander of Special Operations, and I also bring a personal message from Benjamin's father." "Benjamin?" Emily repeated, the name unfamiliar yet somehow meaningful. "The boy you've been helping these past few months," Colonel Hayes explained. "Benjamin Thompson. His father was Master Sergeant James Thompson, one of the finest soldiers under my command." The past tense struck Emily like an anchor pulling at her chest. "I don't understand," she said, still not reaching for the envelope. "Is Benjamin all right?" "He's safe," the colonel assured her. "He's now living with his grandparents in Colorado. But for almost 3 months, he came here every morning before school, after his father was deployed on a classified mission." Suddenly, everything about the boy made sense to Emily. His wary gaze, the loneliness that cloaked him, the hunger that ran deeper than just physical need. What Sergeant Thompson didn't know, the colonel continued, was that his wife left shortly after he deployed, abandoning Benjamin. The boy, too proud and too afraid of being taken away, told no one. He managed to survive on his own, stretching the small emergency fund his father had left him, making each meal last longer than it should. A collective gasp of shock rippled through Lily's diner. Emily felt her heart ache as she imagined little Benjamin, now a boy with a name, a story, struggling to survive on his own, waiting for a father who would never return. "Sergeant Thompson was killed in Afghanistan 2 months ago," Colonel Hayes said, his voice maintaining a professional tone, though the emotion was unmistakable. In his final letter, he asked that we find and thank the woman named Emily who had fed his son without asking questions. The colonel opened the envelope, pulling out an aged piece of paper with strong but slightly trembling handwriting. He wrote, If I don't make it back, please find the person who has been caring for my son. Benjamin mentioned a woman in his letters, someone who never asked why he was alone, never made him feel ashamed. She simply fed him, day after day, expecting nothing in return. Tell her she didn't just feed a hungry boy, she preserved the dignity of a soldier's son. Emily took the letter with trembling hands. Tears blurred her vision as she listened to the colonel's voice, which now seemed to come from somewhere far away. Colonel Hayes continued. The letter was read at Sergeant Thompson's memorial service. When Benjamin finally told us about you, the entire Special Forces community made it their mission to find you and express our gratitude. What you did, without even knowing the story behind that boy, means everything to us. The restaurant remained frozen in silence. Even those who had once mocked Emily's actions now stood still, faces marked by shame and newfound respect. Colonel Hayes straightened to his full height, stood at attention, and delivered a formal salute. A gesture of deep honor, rarely given to civilians. Behind him, every military member present followed suit, saluting in perfect unison. On behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, the brothers in arms of Master Sergeant Thompson, and most importantly, on behalf of Benjamin, thank you. Emily stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment, her heart swelling with emotion she could scarcely contain. Overwhelmed with emotion as she realized that her small gestures, pancakes, eggs, a glass of milk, a smile with no questions, had meant so much to a boy facing unimaginable hardships and to a father fighting his final battles far from home. Emily finally managed to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I just couldn't let him go hungry. The colonel nodded gravely. Sometimes that's all it takes, Miss Carter. Sometimes feeding a hungry child without asking, why is the noblest form of kindness? As if it had been rehearsed, all the soldiers inside the diner and those stationed outside by the vehicles saluted in perfect unison. Inside Lily's diner, the customers, deeply moved by the scene unfolding before them, stood up in silent respect. Emily, the quiet waitress who had lived almost invisibly for years, now stood at the heart of it all, holding a father's final gratitude in her hands. A woman whose simple, daily kindness had preserved not only the well-being of a child, but also the honor and peace of mind of a soldier in his final days. The week following the colonel's visit transformed Lily's diner in ways no one could have predicted. The story spread quickly throughout town, leaping from conversations to social media and finally reaching the local newspaper. Curiously, the same Facebook group that had once mocked Emily's actions now proudly shared Sergeant Master Thompson's letter, gathering thousands of shares and words of support. Regular customers began requesting to sit in Emily's section. They left generous tips, often accompanied by handwritten notes. Thank you for reminding us what truly matters, and my son is in the Navy. Your kindness gives me hope. Thomas, who had initially resented Emily's habit of serving free pancakes, hung a small American flag next to the booth where Benjamin used to sit. Beneath it, he placed a simple plaque, reserved for those who serve and for the families who wait. From then on, that booth never sat empty, often occupied by veterans, active duty soldiers passing through town, and occasionally by families clearly struggling, all treated with quiet dignity by the staff. On the 7th day after the colonel's visit, Emily received a plain brown envelope addressed to her. Inside, there was a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, the careful handwriting betraying the youth of its author. Dear Miss Emily, I didn't know your name until the day the colonel came to the diner. But every morning during those months, you were the only person who looked at me like I was someone, not a burden. Dad always said real heroes don't wear capes. They wear uniforms. But I think sometimes they wear aprons too. When Dad stopped writing, I thought the world had forgotten about us both. But you remembered me, even when I couldn't explain why I was alone. Grandma and Grandpa are very kind. They're teaching me how to fish, and Grandma makes amazing cookies. But I miss Dad, and sometimes I miss your pancakes too. Thank you for not asking questions when I didn't know how to answer them. Your friend Benjamin Thompson, P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It actually had a happy ending after all. Emily framed the letter and hung it discreetly behind the counter. Not in a place of prominence, not as a display, but as a quiet personal reminder of why small acts of kindness always matter. When customers asked about it, she simply smiled and said, "Just a thank you note from a special friend." The story of Lily's Diner and its connection to the Special Forces community quickly spread across military circles. Soldiers traveling through town made detours just to visit, often leaving coins or unit insignias as tokens of gratitude. Those small tokens gradually formed a growing collage of appreciation on a bulletin board behind the counter, a tapestry of thanks from all over the country. 3 months after the colonel's visit, a school group came to the diner for lunch following a field trip. An 8-year-old girl, her eyes bright and curious, watched Emily closely as she filled water glasses. "My dad says you're a hero," the girl announced confidently. "Do you feel like one?" Emily smiled, kneeling down to meet the girl's gaze. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be hungry, and not just for food." The girl's teacher, who had overheard the conversation, gently added, "And sometimes hungry for kindness." Emily looked up, meeting the teacher's understanding gaze, and gave a small nod. The teacher was right. Hunger came in many forms. Food was only the most visible. As summer approached, Lily's Diner organized a fundraiser to support military families, raising enough to establish a small emergency fund for the children of deployed soldiers. Surprisingly, Thomas matched every donation personally and one day admitted to Emily, "Your quiet persistence changed something in me. I never understood why my dad was so insistent about feeding every kid in the neighborhood," he said, shaking his head with a small smile. "It used to drive my mom crazy. But I think I understand now. Sometimes a meal means much more than just food." On a quiet Tuesday morning, almost exactly 1 year after Benjamin had first walked into the diner, Emily arrived for her shift and found something small and metallic resting on her workstation, a challenge coin. A special symbol carrying deep meaning among military circles, usually given only to those belonging to certain units. It lay beside her notepad, on one side the insignia of the Special Forces, on the other an engraved message, "Semper Memor," always remembering. Emily glanced around the still empty restaurant, trying to spot who might have left it. Finding no one, she stepped outside to scan the street. The morning breeze stirred the American flag fluttering above the entrance. No unfamiliar cars were parked nearby. No courier waited on the sidewalk. Just the town slowly waking up. Sprinklers ticking over lawns, and the distant hum of the school bus making its early rounds. She tucked the coin into her pocket, feeling its reassuring weight. A silent reminder that kindness given without expectation often finds its way back in the most unexpected ways. That evening, as she hung up her apron before heading home, Emily noticed Thomas installing a new sign in Lily's Diner's front window. It was simple but elegant and read, "Who you are, what you can pay, no one leaves hungry." Catching her looking, Thomas gave a small, sheepish shrug. The new policy spoke for itself. Emily smiled, recognizing it as a quiet thank you. No speeches, no fanfare, just a silent commitment to see the hunger in others and meet it with what was most needed. Food without judgment, kindness without questions. As she walked home under the fading light, feeling the solid weight of the challenge coin in her pocket, Emily thought of Benjamin, now growing up with his grandparents in Colorado, carrying with him the memory of his father, and perhaps the certainty that even in the darkest moments, pockets of kindness still exist in unexpected places. Not everyone who extends a hand seeks recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone is no longer hungry, and that alone can change a life. Maybe you'll forget this story in a few days. Maybe no one will retell it. But stories like this stay etched quietly into the invisible fabric of the world, whispering that as long as compassion exists, there is still hope. The young waitress gently slid the plate of pancakes toward the boy, just as she had so many times before, and softly murmured, "The usual, sweetheart." No charge, no questions, no expectations. And on that morning, when the entire neighborhood seemed to freeze for just a moment, Emily understood, in a way she never had before, that the world's greatest changes aren't made by those who shout the loudest, but by those who choose every single day to love in silence. And sometimes that is all it takes. It is all.